Hey everyone, it's Carrie, and I'm back with another episode of Gen Z Pro. Today with me, I have Willa Blake and Isabel Sunderland. Willa is a campaign associate of Issue One, and Isabella is part of the Council for Responsible Social Media, also part of Issue One. Both of them are part of the team of youth advocates at Design It For Us, advocating for child protection and online safety. So, welcome to my channel, both of you. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Hi,
Thank
thanks for
you.
having
Yeah, very
us.
excited.
So I've invited you guys to kind of talk about the Snap lawsuit. But before that, could you guys just introduce yourself and your role in those organizations a little bit more? Can we start with Willa?
Yeah, sure. Hello everyone. Thanks for having me. Yeah, so I kind of have a dual role here. I'm part of the Design It For Us coalition, but I'm an associate with Issue One, which is a democracy reform organization. It's been around for about a decade. But specifically, I work for the tech reform team. So we specialize in this stuff. And we work with a full council called the Council for Responsible Social Media. That's about 60 members, ranging from attorneys general to former secretaries of state to filmmakers, all people who have a vested interest in kids' online safety and others. But yeah, Isabel, do you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Isabel. I'm also a part of the Design for Us Coalition, and I've had the privilege of being part of it since it really started, I think maybe a year and a half ago. So it's been such a growth experience to be able to see all the young advocates within this space. And then I'm an intern right now with Issue One's tech reform team as well, which Willa put very succinctly, but definitely looking at that intersection between kids' online safety and also democracy.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And here's another warm-up question. I'm just curious, how did your interest in advocacy for tech policy start, and how has the journey been for both of you so far?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I come from a campaign background, so I had an interest in just bipartisan efforts broadly. But then I came to Issue One initially as an intern because I just didn't know people were working on this issue. This is something I'd thought about
Me
for years.
neither.
Like I didn't know that people were actively trying to make social media healthier. I thought it was just one of those things that's going to harm my mental health forever. And I had deleted TikTok in 2021 because I got sucked into the infinite scroll and to such an intense degree. I was on it for like 9, 10 hours a day. It was diabolical. It was horrible, like actually. And I found myself getting so much more sad, and I would the algorithm would like point me in directions that I did not want to go to kind of exasperate my sadness so that I could stay on the platform for as long as possible. So that's to a degree how I got here, because the work that we're doing touches on all of those issues and more, and it's great to be a part of this effort.
Yeah, and just tagging on to kind of the description that Willa gave, I came across it in kind of two different ways, two roundabout ways. The first was kind of in an academic setting where it was my freshman year of college, and I was asked by my professor to write a policy paper, picking out something that I saw in the headlines and writing out what I thought should be done about it. And in this particular case, it was like minutes before the deadline, so I was working to get it done. And I saw that there was something released about Facebook and Instagram and Cambridge Analytica, which was a big data breach that happened. And at the same time that was going on, I also saw that the same platform was being implicated in international human rights abuses as well. So I saw the convergence of two very different industries coming together, all focused on one platform. And that really piqued my interest in like an intellectual sense. And then from that point onward, it has been really diving down a rabbit hole and slowly uncovering not only my personal experiences using these platforms, but seeing how tech companies have really orchestrated the user experience to take advantage of young people online. And so that's really been a very large passion point, both the academic and personal sense.
Hmm. You guys, that whole like doom scrolling thing is so relatable because tell me why I took a look at my screen time the other day and it was like 15 hours.
Yeah.
So
That's so valid.
No, actually, that's what they want.
That is, that's
that's what
what
they
my
want.
screen time has been, and
Yeah.
it's rough.
Hmm. Okay, now to the main portion of our interview today. I saw the lawsuit breakdown package sent by Zarman Kershi from Design It For Us. By the way, check out their website. I'll link it in the description. But they have been so great about, breaking down like issues like this for us. And I was wondering, I was telling Willa and Isabel just before we started that I am not an expert in public policy. And the reason I've invited them here today is to actually give you guys a bit of an explanation in a more bite-sized way. So I was wondering if you guys could just like tell us like a couple main points from the lawsuit that you think should be the main takeaway.
I mean, Isabel and I spent a couple of days reading through the whole thing, which was not only actual labor, but emotional labor, like as well. It was really gruesome stuff. Essentially, the main focus of the lawsuit is negligence, and Snapchat received more than 10,000 records of child online sex abuse and ignored them. This was monthly, by the way. And it was found to be like the most common platform for sexual abuse, drug sales, gun sales, all of that. And there were internal reports that happened that found this information. And they actively ignored it because keeping the kids on the platform for as long as possible, for whatever purpose, users, even if they're trading child pornography, it maximizes their profit because engagement directly leads to money. So basically, they had the lawsuit was proof of negligence and even more, if you want to touch on anything I missed, because
Yeah.
that's a big
So
part of
I
it too.
think what we see really come out of this lawsuit is three different categories, is the way that I like to think about it. We have that child sextortion piece where we see the proliferation of child sexual abuse material on these platforms, not only it happening, but also the fact that, as Willa kind of pointed out, the fact that executives knew that it was happening and in fact created design features to make it easier for it to happen. The second component that we saw that Willa also touched on is kind of that drug and gun trafficking component, which we see that because Snapchat has certain design features, the ephemeral content, or like literally everyone else in the world understands it to be just like the snaps that you send back and forth. And the fact that they disappear after a short little bit of time really makes it easy for illegal activity to happen on these platforms. And so what New Mexico found essentially is that we had drug dealers and gun traffickers using these platforms to connect with other users, whether it be underage users or just users who shouldn't be purchasing these items in the first place.
Yeah.
The third thing that we saw from it is that the lawsuit really dived into the specific product design features that have helped to really damage youth mental health. And within this like whole broad scope, I want to say that the crux of this investigation boiled down to what the Department of Justice actually launched, based on the child sextortion claims. They created a fake account, and I don't want to go too on about this, but they created a fake account called Sexy Heather 14. And the implication was that this was an underage user. They changed the age of the account to make sure that it was under 13, which is the requirement that we have in the United States under the Child and Online Privacy Protection Act. And ultimately, what they found is that almost immediately, this fake account that they created was being connected with child sex predators, predators who were sending explicit images of themselves or other people, and also asking this user to send photos back and forth. And so I just want to like leave that out there if you have any other questions on it, but I think that really gives an overall scope of what this lawsuit's really about.
Yeah, and I saw the pictures or the screenshots included in the document, and honestly, pretty horrifying. I looked through, I think, including the ones where it was just grown men sending these pictures to, or like selling these pictures to underage kids. It's absolutely disturbing. And kind of a follow-up question about this. So, how big is this case? Has there ever been an like expose like this to this scale before? And what are the implications of, this being publicized?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of been a recent wave of litigation against the social media platforms. This one specifically honed in on Snap, but these harms are not specific or isolated to Snapchat. There's been lawsuits against Meta, TikTok, even YouTube, and all of them kind of hit on the same points, which is that the platforms are designed in a manner that connects people who post harmful content drives forward harmful content towards users that have no business seeing it, and claim to be moderating the content when in reality they're most of the time just moving it to a different place. And yeah, so that's what I'll say. This is not new. I would say this is definitely one of the most disturbing I've read, but in reality, a lot of the cases, if you get down to the nitty-gritty, have a lot of these same themes that are deeply, deeply troubling and often at the harm of children. So
Yeah, I can pull out three examples based off of that because I think that was a really good overview. We saw with TikTok, for example, 14 state attorney generals on October 8th filed lawsuits against TikTok, saying that their TikTok live feature has enabled, I think the way they put it was a virtual strip club for minors. So it's really enabled the spread of child sexual abuse material. We also saw that, I believe yesterday, a lawsuit filed by 33 state attorney generals against Meta for the same sextortion claims that we see kind of echoed within Snap was allowed to progress with the order of a California judge. And then a third example that we see, I think the article was published maybe a year ago in the Wall Street Journal by Jeff Horowitz, I want to say. But it revealed that Instagram has created a network of pedophiles. And so I encourage any of the folks listening or watching to check that article out because it really rolls back the curtain on the harms that we see on these platforms. I think the last thing that I'll say is that although we consistently see child sexual abuse proliferating on these platforms, the thing that makes Snap really unique is the fact that the content disappears after a short amount of time. So not only does that, influence younger people to believe that their images are going to be safe and not spread online, therefore increasing the amount of sextortion that happens, but also B, it makes it really difficult for law enforcement to take any action whatsoever because the content, the evidence is destroyed. And I think that's the unique point that we can pull out from the Snapchat case.
Mm-hmm. Actually, really interesting. You referred a lot to the ephemeral aspect of Snap. So I've done a lot of research into Snapchat specifically, and there are voices out there saying that this is just part of like Snap's innovation, and they're really like connecting it to the bigger debate between is innovation worth engagement, worth the troubles that these people are going through. And I don't know, just what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I mean, everyone's going to argue on behalf of the businesses. That's something that we've learned, definitely on the Hill, on Capitol Hill, I should say. The lobbying attempts coming from tech companies or coming from nonprofits funded by tech companies, it's severe. So there's always going to be people playing the innovation card, I would say. In my view, that it is possible that there can be a world that social media exists, the platforms can make money, and people don't have to be harmed. It'll be difficult, but that's kind of what we're advocating for. But we need the regulatory oversight to achieve that because we found that if left to their own devices, pun intended, social media companies will not regulate themselves. And if it's up to them, they will do whatever it takes to maximize profit, even if it means contributing to the mental health crisis, contributing to drug addiction amongst minors, contributing to minors accessing guns. Like they don't care as long as they maximize their revenue. And so I guess this is like a roundabout way of saying like what we're advocating for is regulation on the federal level because they have absolutely no incentive within themselves to improve the platforms.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, mine is kind of twofold. The first is exactly what you were saying. It's that liability aspect and the responsibility that platforms have. What we see is that, for example, the car industry is something that we bring up a lot, or the drug industry, is that innovation is good. It's why we have things like penicillin. It's why we have cars that drive fast and that are safe. But with those, there are steps that are part of every single process that requires those companies to make their products safe. There's a reason why we have the FDA regulating drugs before they actually even hit the market. There's a reason why we have seatbelt regulations. And so innovation can coexist with safety by design as well. And we've seen that in every other industry. The tech industry, who employs billions of dollars and billions of lobbyists, have been able to sidestep that. And that really illustrates the reason why legislation is so important. I'm sure that we'll maybe hit on this later, but there's a act called the Kids Online Safety Act that's it's already passed through the Senate. It's currently passing through the House right now. And it really hits on a lot of these key issues, making sure that platforms have a responsibility or duty to care about the users that it has on its platforms. I think the second component that I'll also draw in here very briefly is the fact that yes, innovation can exist, but what we've seen in the case of Snapchat, is that it's at the cost of literally all the users, and that they know that it's at the cost of those users as well. The Snapchat case has, like the unredacted filing at least, has thousands of examples of where Snapchat employees have raised the issue of child sextortion online, and yet their top leadership has said that's not a priority that we want to have because we want to make sure that users stay on this platform longer. And so I, as just personally, get really frustrated when I hear tech companies raise those arguments because it's not true.
Yeah, and I love that example or that comparison you made to the medical and car industry because I think that really puts into perspective just how different these tech or big tech platforms have been acting and like skirting around regulations. So before we talk about the more like legislative government side, I did want to ask you guys interesting questions. So just this summer, I had the chance to talk to some, I guess, executive or security people from Pinterest, and they mentioned how Pinterest is kind of unique from other websites or apps in the way that they really do care about user security, user safety. And I'm just wondering, like, do you guys know any other website that maybe not does the best job, but like a better job than, for example, Meta or Snap for kids' safety? You can say no.
I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like Nextdoor or like very like localized apps. I think it's like the apps that have fewer users are often safer. Is that
With an asterisk.
with it safer in quotes? I think the more popular social media platforms, even Be Real, that has come to fruition lately, they've started doing ads in their platform, which we thought it was going to be impenetrable to the system. But as soon as user engagement increases, there's more of an incentive to monetize that increase. So I don't know. I feel like there is a couple, but Pinterest, I love Pinterest.
I think the issue is that I'm sure there exists a wonderful company somewhere that does have user safety in mind. But I think what we can generally say is that for the majority of these social media companies specifically, their business models just don't align with user safety, period. If their intent, if they answer to investors who want to see revenue built off of the kids that they have online, then that's never going to be congruent with safety. It's never going to be congruent, especially if there's no legislation to hold that in check as well. So I don't know if there's specifically one that I can like name off the top of my head, but I'm always very hesitant to label anyone as like positive, because there's so many forces working against that.
I see. And I guess to me, it sounds like right now that when it comes to social media apps that are so heavily reliant on engagement as well part of their product, it's almost inherent that they will someday like veer up to the evil end. They'll try to profit more than care about their users. So should we still have these social media apps at all?
Yes, I think that is a big thing that we like to preface our work with because a lot of what we do implies that we're anti-social media. We're not. We think that social media can be a beautiful commonplace for activism, for disparate groups finding each other, for kids who are discovering themselves and want to get advice from people they would have never been able to talk to. Like, social media has so many great aspects, but those are disproportionately overwhelmed by all of the harms. And to us, we see a possibility with regulation of those more pure, wholesome, commonplace aspects of social media being on the center stage rather than us talking about all the horrible things that these platforms bring. And we think that's possible, but similar, I also like to make the comparison to the environmental crisis and like the EPA. I think that's another situation where people are so concerned with growth and innovation and like just making as much money as possible, regardless of sacred land or sacred resources. And that's where the EPA comes in, because they hold people back from exploiting areas. And in this case, companies are exploiting children. So we need someone to be holding them back if we're going to ever get to a place of wholesome social media.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that's often a argument that big tech tends to levy against any kind of regulation. They always say, well, if you put these policies in place, well, then look at all the benefits of social media that's going to go downhill. But I think we've seen from other models outside of the United States that regulation is positively possible. We see in the European Union, for example, the General Data Rights Protection Act, I think is what it's called. That has created limits on big tech that they're being held accountable now. And the value of their platform and the quality of their platform hasn't degraded either. So there definitely exists a world where we can have positive experiences on social media and have regulation without hurting young people in the process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's very good that you guys made that distinction. I think it's important for us to remember the good side of internet and social media, rather than always focus on the negative side, which is undoubtedly very important. And Isabel, I liked how you mentioned the European, whatever they're doing with the data,
Yeah.
because I was gonna ask you about government, or I guess now specifically US government. So from what I understand and what I've seen when it comes to legislations, there seem to be a huge or like a significant lag between these issues, like starting to surface and the government actually taking action and implementing laws or legislations. So what's the issue here? Why is there such a big lag between, like the timelines?
That is a big question. And it's something I ask myself or scream into my pillow at night. Um, there's a lot of things at play here. Congressional action is extremely complicated. Something we do at Issue One is work very, very hard to build relationships with each member of Congress and explain to them the importance of this issue. Um, States have caught on to this stagnation. They've been working to implement design-focused legislation like the Age-Appropriate Design Code, because federal legislation moves slow because there's a lot of bargaining and cooperation and more often, what's the word? Compromise. And there's two bodies of Congress these days. The Senate has been a lot more on our side. The House is a little bit more complicated. And there's also the issue of each congressperson has their pet issue. And it seems that the issue of tech reform is beautifully bipartisan, but the avenues in which to get to tech reform are varied because each member, or not each member, but many members have their own bills and their own plans that they want to get credit for, And so when the Kids Online Safety Act came to be, it took us a long time to get everyone on board because everyone's like, well, what about my bill? What about me? And so there's a lot of ego involved, I will say, on or off the record. I don't care. And another piece of it is that there's a lot of terms that needed to be defined. People often conflated kids' online safety with kids' privacy. We had to explain that it was a different beast entirely. People want certain aspects of the bill to be left out because of Section 230, which is an entirely complicated issue that I'm not even going to get into right now. So all of this is to say that congressional action is a very long process and a very complicated and often very frustrating process, which is why we've been dipping into state work a little bit. Not that it's any less frustrating, but it's a little quicker. That's all I really have to say about that.
Yeah, I think across the board, Willa mentioned state work and also at a congressional level, we see that there's such a powerful lobby that's pushing against any kind of legislation that's taken place. Snap, for example, I think the number was $860,000 was spent in 2023 alone killing kids legislation. Now, they've publicly said that they support the Kids Online Safety Act, the act that we're really pushing for. But that announcement came right before they had a big congressional hearing where their CEO, Evan Spiegel, was put on record for all the child sexual abuse material put on the record. And B, we also see that Snap is a part of a larger trade organization as well. A lot of different trade organizations. I know specifically one is what's it called? Is it TechNet? TechNet is one of them. Net Choice, pardon me,
Yeah.
is the biggest one. And I'm looking at some numbers right now. They spent $1.5 million lobbying against the Kids Online Safety Act that we see, and they've employed, let me get the number. They've employed 142 lobbyists, which is one lobbyist for nearly every single member of Congress. And so Willa and I are sitting here. We're part of Design It For Us. Design It For Us it's a very large organization, but it definitely has like 30, 40 strong people pushing for this legislation. And that's young people who are trying to get in the doors for the however many members of Congress that exist. And so we see that there's a huge disparity between the resources that these large trade organizations have that support Snapchat and TikTok and all of our lovely social media platforms, and the people who are pushing back to increase regulation for them as well. And so I think that's thrown a huge, huge stick in the way of trying to get any kind of regulation passed in Congress.
Mm-hmm. So it's like you guys are really pushing up against a wall here.
Yes.
Yeah. I guess that kind of leads into my last question. So with all that said, what are ways people, outside of Design It For Us, or just people who are very passionate about advocating for this issue, how can we support this cause? How can we help you guys?
Call your Congress people. It sounds silly, but there's a lot of power in direct action from constituents, especially in election year. People really care to know what issues are powering their electorate. They want to get reelected. They want to represent the needs of their people. So I think that's a big one. Joining coalitions like Design It For Us is a great way to get involved in a way where things are explained to you. You're told where to go, you're told who to talk to, and you're alongside such a great, powerful group of young advocates who know their stuff. And it's very easy to get involved. And other than that, I mean, voting is important. Please do that. And, I would say from the user perspective, like take moments away from social media and see how it feels. Like think about what you would want in a social media platform and just ask yourself more critical questions about the role that social media has in your life.
I completely agree with Willa. I think one thing that I've learned in this space is reading a lot, which for some people that might be like, ew, gross, I don't want to do that. And for some people it might be, that sounds awesome. But I think just reading, keeping your finger on the pulse point of news and seeing how social media executives are kind of changing and transforming the way that you interact online, I think that's a really good entry level step. And also, from like a personal standpoint, I think it really does have to start with just like the actual individual. And this is not sponsored, but there's an app that I use called Screen Zen, where you can download it and like it's like screen time limits, but you can like set it on your social media accounts, and it gives you like a limited number of times that you can like actually open up the app before it's completely blocked. And that's been helpful in letting me step back, disconnect, and then have a larger perspective on like really what role is social media playing in my life. So I think that's just like step one that I would highly recommend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and what a great note to end this interview off on. That was a very insightful conversation I think I've had with two people who are clearly very passionate and well-versed in this topic. Thank you again to Willa and Isabel for talking with me, and I hope my users or my viewers stay tuned for the next episode.
Thank you.